Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, a warning that government plans to phase out lead ammunition may hit government plans to control deer numbers. But let's start with our topic for this week, fertilisers, what's used to grow our food, where it comes from and what's changing. Farmers use a variety of things to add nutrients to soil and plants to improve the quality and quantity of crops, from organic fertilisers like manure and compost to sewage sludge and man-made fertilisers like liquid nitrogen. We'll talk about all of them this week, as well as their impact on the environment. To get a sense of fertiliser use here in the UK, I spoke to Joe Gilbertson, head of fertiliser at the Agricultural Industries Confederation.
Manures, sewage sludges and digestate from biodigesters. That's probably about 110 million tonnes of material that's put on farmland every year. By comparison, the mineral fertiliser sector accounts for around about 3.2 to 3.5 million tonnes of fertiliser. They both contain roughly the same amount of nutrient. The problem with organic fertilisers and sludges is they're very wet. So when they're applied to the land, get flushed through the soil and end up in watercourses.
So when we're talking about these man-made fertilisers, how are they made and where are they made?
Nitrogen fertilisers. These are all produced using a process known as the Haber-Bosch process, which essentially takes nitrogen from the air and converts it into a mineral form. Then you've also got phosphorus and another one called potassium. Both of these are normally derived from mining operations. We've got a potash mine that produces a product called polyhalite on the North York Moors that stretches out under the North Sea. Plus we import a lot of natural rock phosphate from North African countries. Although we manufacture nitrogen fertilisers in the UK, they're reliant on imported ammonia as the feedstock. So with the exception of the polyhalite mine on the North York Moors, all our fertiliser sources are brought in from abroad.
We saw the impact of when Russia invaded Ukraine. We had this massive spike in prices. Now we're seeing what's happening in the Middle East. Are we also expecting another price hike?
About 35 million tonnes of nitrogen fertilisers are produced every year in the Gulf states. They're exported primarily to India and Southern Asia, and they account for probably about a fifth of the world's fertiliser production. Now, the UK only accounts for about 1% of the global fertiliser market, and therefore we're very much the junior partner when it comes to acquiring fertilisers. So it's inevitable that if there's a displacement of fertiliser from the Gulf states, that will have an effect on restricting supply and therefore an increase in price.
Perhaps not surprisingly, given the price fluctuations we've seen over the past few years, many farmers are trying to use less. They're either looking at regenerative farming or they're doing precision farming. Has there been a noticeable effect on demand yet?
Yes, very much so. We are, as a nation, using half the amount of mineral fertiliser that we were using probably 20 years ago. And since the Ukrainian crisis, farmers have been even more exacting in making sure that they maximise the effectiveness of their fertiliser. We've been encouraging farmers to use nutrient management plans to properly target and precisely apply them according to what the crop actually needs, so that there's nothing left. It's all used by the crop wherever possible.
Joe Gilbertson from the AIC. More on fertiliser all week. A new loom is being built for a woolen mill in Wales, which closed down 50 years ago. Cambrian Mill is in an area once known as the Huddersfield of Wales, as it was so important to wool production. And when it closed down, it became the National Wool Museum, which this year celebrates its 50th anniversary. Marie-Claire Carey-Jones has been to visit, and there she met one of the museum's crafters, Richard Collins.
We've got these amazing looking looms around us which look really old, and you can smell the oil coming off them.
Our looms range from the 1880s all the way up to 1950s, 60s. So on the loom that we're here next to now, I'm producing Welsh tapestries. It's a combination of British lamb's wool and New Zealand lamb's wool. We blend the two together, as they did many years ago in Cambrian Mill.
People might be surprised that it's not Welsh wool you're using here.
Yes, so Welsh wool is traditionally coarse because of the landscape the sheep are reared on. But we are working with Cambrian wool and developing an entirely Welsh wool yarn that works on our historic machines, and we can weave in Wales using 100% Welsh wool.
So I've now come into the gift shop here at the museum to talk to Susie Park, who is the owner of Cambrian Wool. Susie, lovely to meet you.
And you? Have a little squidge. People do think that British wool and Welsh wool is itchy and scratchy. Well, of course, it doesn't have to be if you get the right mix and the right breeds. So we've got a Welsh Mountain Ewe crossed with a blue-faced Leicester Ram, which gives you the most beautiful quality yarn.
This is our new Make and Create gallery, where we're going to be giving our visitors an opportunity to trial new craft courses and so on. My name's Anne Whittle. I'm the head of the National Wool Museum. The woolen industry was the most widespread industry in Wales. Over the years, it's been very important for the fashion industry. We've all seen the tapestry patterns in the 1960s and 1970s. But I think fashion's changed. Maybe the industry weren't quick enough in adapting to the new materials and cloth that was coming into Wales. So it's very important now that we tell the story for the future, and also to inspire future makers and designers of Wales.
So the museum isn't just about the history of wool, it's very much about its future.
Definitely. We're having a new loom being made in Italy. So then we'll be able to train people in the kind of historic Dob Cross looms, power looms that were important in the industry, but we can also then help inspire future generations through a modern computerised looms.
Anne Whittle at the National Wool Museum. The government's decision to ban lead shot from 2028 will impact the ability to control deer numbers. Well, that's according to BASC, the British Association for Shooting and Conservation, which says that the new legislation, which will cover England, Scotland and Wales, will ban the ammunition used by many deer stalkers. Last month, the government released its 10-year English deer strategy, which estimated that a third of England's woodlands are damaged by deer, with urgent action needed to protect trees and wildlife. The plan includes measures to identify priority culling areas and make it easier to carry out licensed nighttime and closed-season shooting. The ban on lead ammunition will prevent the release of the toxic metal into the land and water, which the government says kills up to 100,000 wildfowl every year. Shooting organisations announced a voluntary move away from lead in 2020, but had recommended that some lead ammunition be retained. Terry Bean is Deputy Director of Shooting and Operations at BASC.
So the idea was that we was going to move away from shot in a voluntary capacity. Now, the government have decided to restrict lead ammunition in a very broad scale. What the government have decided to let us keep is what's known as small calibers, so small ammunition from smaller rifles used for pest control and air guns. And the reason they've allowed us to keep that, and the reason we wanted and lobbied to keep that, is because this is used by firearms that don't currently have any alternatives that are suitable for the job intended.
What's the issue then when it comes to deer?
So you use what's called large caliber rifles predominantly, and they go across multiple sizes. And what they've done is they've put the smallest of those sizes as a restriction. But ironically, the smallest of those sizes is used by the most people to shoot deer. So this isn't about deer, it's about having an effective tool to do the job.
But surely you could use something else, couldn't you?
That is the problem. So yes, you can use something else. You could go and get a larger caliber or a new gun, but there would be significant investment. And as this is a precautionary restriction, then it seems ridiculous to restrict something that is so widely used. Equally, the pressure that's on firearms licensing departments at the minute would mean that everybody would need a variation, which they wouldn't get. Given the significance that the government have just put on deer management, and they've just released the impact assessment for England, this seems a very uncoordinated move.
Why can't those people, though, just use an alternative ammunition?
Without getting too technical, not all ammunition suits every gun. So ammunition, these guns that we're talking about, was made to use lead. It's to do with the rifling in the barrel. And by moving to non-lead, you're restricted on what you can use.
The government's argument here is that there is a risk to at least 1 million birds over the coming decades if we continue using as much lead shot, lead ammunition, and particularly a risk to birds of prey and so on. So the status quo is not an option.
No, indeed. And again, that's why BASC and the other shooting organisations put a voluntary transition away from shot. Shot is where the biggest risk is to birds, particularly. And as I said, the precautionary restriction around lead ammunition for rifles, of which we're talking about deer, is exactly that, it's precautionary.
What impact do you think this might have on deer control?
Well, it's difficult to say. I know ammunition manufacturers are trying to develop ammunition to suit the firearms that I'm talking about, the 243 in particular, to enable people to do it. But we are restricted. So it will mean that less people will be out managing deer in the countryside as we need to daily. And if anything, we don't want to, and it's a terrible thought to think that we would be injuring animals or using ammunition that isn't suitable. We owe it to the deer, the species which we have to manage, to make sure that every ammunition we use is ethical.
Terry Bean from the British Association for Shooting and Conservation. That's all for today. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Beatrice Fenton, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.